Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And in this video, as you might have caught from the title, we're going to be talking about a new bit of legislation going through Congress right now, which could potentially affect the music industry, potentially or specifically the streaming sector of the music industry, songwriters specifically. And there's been a lot of coverage about this on a music site that I follow pretty closely, Digital Music News. We have Paul Resnikoff of the site here with me right now, and we're going to be talking about the legislation, who's pushing it, who could potentially benefit off of it, what it could be missing, and why it could put songwriters in a situation where they're kind of at an uphill battle as far as being paid adequately by streaming services and the like. Paul, thanks for coming on, dude. To start, where exactly has this legislation come from? You know, who wrote it, who is pushing for it to be written, and who is going to see benefit of this passing? Because right now it's moving to the Senate, and after that it would need to bounce back to the House again after that, I believe. Is that correct? It's all digital now. Is
And
it being fixed to anything? Yeah. And is
um,
this act an attempt to give Spotify the ability to totally skirt these payments that they owe, or is it a way for them to essentially kind of pay these same payments but under a different guise? Because obviously the music isn't being fixed to anything, it's digital, but why not, I guess, a digital version of that same kind of license? Okay, so in the effort to create this legislation and kind of cover everyone's back, because it sort of seems like there's kind of a lost in translation situation going on here, because we're talking transitioning from physical formats to digital formats. Is something else being lost in translation there, where labels or musicians aren't seeing quite the benefit that they would like to out of this legislation, the Music Modernization Act, as they would out of previous fees that they would get off of mechanicals? Yeah, as you just said earlier, and as has been reported, there is a clause sort of worked into the legislation that Spotify can't be sued over this specifically. And like you said, I didn't know at the time when I was asking you that it went as far as sort of to be like a get out of jail free card, like the whole slate is just wiped clean as if they don't owe anything previously, when we were in sort of that gray area where nobody quite knew who owed what, but just assuming Spotify owed because they are making money off of it, off of the replay of this music. I guess my question beyond that, though, is so publishers will not be able to sue Spotify with the understanding that, okay, well, with this legislation, everything's going to be black and white and it'll be clear now, and Spotify will pay us and they'll owe us the money. But previously, it seems like they've been skirting payments that they owe just I don't know. It seems like they're kind of feigning ignorance a little bit. You know, sure, there's a bit of a gray area there, but it seems like we haven't been able to trust them to make those payments in the past, just because they have been able to act like, oh, well, you know, it's all just too confusing. Meanwhile, you guys make tons and tons and tons of money and probably have loads of lawyers on your side who, if you really wanted them to go through the fine print and explain all of this to you, they easily could. So, I mean, is there really kind of confusion or ignorance on Spotify's part? The idea that there's not a the idea that there's not a database or anything. I mean, don't places like I guess previously during the broadcast era, didn't places like BMI sort of serve that purpose? Is that something that companies like Spotify can still make use of now, or is that kind of slowly being phased out now that we're kind of in the era of streaming? It seems sort of like a bit of unnecessary confusion to me as far as who should get the money in their pocket. I mean, it seems like the people who Spotify owes money to should be in close contact, given that the music that's on their platform, Spotify is not just simply stealing or taking the music and putting it on their platform and then waiting for the rights owners to come to them later to say, hey, our music's on your platform, you owe us money. I mean, obviously, publishers and labels are putting the music on the platform, and instead of having to just pay that money directly to the publisher or the label and then letting them sort of divvy the money out amongst who the songwriters are, amongst whoever else is sort of owed money as a result of those streams, Spotify is expected to track down every single person connected to the track to give them some money. So finally, to tie this up for a lot of the people who watch, I know we have a lot of independent artists and musicians who may be on smaller indie labels, and maybe even artists who watch every once in a while who might find themselves on majors and might not be aware of this legislation going through. Going forward, if this does manage to pass, and assuming it stays roughly the same as it is now, what could artists and music fans potentially expect as far as how this might affect the bottom dollar of a lot of these people who are trying to essentially scrape their way through the music industry and try to make it in the age of streaming, which seems like it's just getting harder and harder than ever. And as far as this legislation stands right now, it seems like in order to continue to be paid or be paid at all, that some artists are going to need to jump through some hoops or deal with a little bit of red tape. But as it stands currently, does this legislation affect how much artists are being paid off of this, or sort of the rate at which they're being paid, or is that just like a completely different issue? And and finally, we have been talking a lot about Spotify, but this legislation also affects pretty much every other music streaming service out there as well: Apple Music, Pandora, etc. Is that correct? And experience, have those platforms been having the same kind of problems or confusion with, like, oh, who to pay, where does the money go? And finally, I'll ask because you did mention it there in your last statement, but Spotify planning to go public this year. Is there sense that this legislation is kind of being pushed through right now at this very moment because Spotify is potentially trying to tie up some loose ends so that investors aren't getting cold feet with more suits like this going forward into the future? All right, I want to thank Paul for coming on from Digital Music News and sort of explaining and breaking down this bill and its potential effects. I guess, are there any sort of concerns right now with the bill that you feel like music fans and artists should be trying to voice to their representatives in Congress at the moment, or is this just something we should just kind of be keeping our eye on? All right. Well, thanks very much for coming on
Hey,
and breaking it all down, and we'll have you on again if there's anything
okay,
else we need you to explain to us over here. I'll link
great.
some of the articles that are on Digital Music News down there in the description, along with news at digitalmusicnews.com. And again, Paul, thanks for coming on.